Welcome to our podcast. Let's see what happens. And this podcast features two women with ADHD, and we talk about our life choices, maybe shed some light on life with ADHD, perhaps inspire. Probably not, though. Okay. What would you say you do here? So, this is a part of a podcast where we are interviewing women who have ADHD, either diagnosed or undiagnosed, and their experiences with it because we think it's interesting to have other people talk about it. These are moms, athletes, just people adulting in a world that is hard to adult in. And that is what this series is. We don't have an official name. Maybe it's like women superhero, fantastic interviewee moments because that's concise and it probably works. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Airbud problem, but I fixed it, sort of, not really. Okay, this is interesting because you're a fairy and also you have these ADHD tendencies, which seems mind-blowingly hard. I can't even imagine. Tell me about it.
I don't even know. I feel I think, sheepish about any of the characterizations, but just listening to your podcast, there's just so much that I identify with, both in terms of your description of being a fairy and then also your description of things like the object permanence and time management and all this kind of stuff. And I think that for me, I had a lot of the bad results of that kind of mental capacity or whatever. I don't know, just that way of being as a kid. I lost my car keys so many times to the point where I was in tears of just like, I cannot believe that I can't find them again. I remember ever since I was a little kid, I would lose stuff and I would just imagine, I wish the whole world would just go white except for that object. Because I don't mind looking for it, but if I know that I can find it, there's some solace in that. And that just has plagued me my whole life. So stuff like that. And then I cannot exist without a calendar. If it's not on my calendar, it is not real. And things like that are just, I've built all of these mechanisms around being able to exist and operate. And I think some of that is because my parents were very loving, but they were also just very, very absent. They were always busy. So the only way to manage my life was if I managed it, starting at a young age, I think.
That's so interesting. How were you in school? Did you have trouble keeping your stuff together in school? Or?
Oh, yeah, I was a terrible student. Terrible student. Yeah.
I'm so. Because obviously you're smart. We should say you don't work for NASA, but I tell people that you do.
I worked with lots of NASA data and
okay, so I'm close. Yeah, you're obviously very smart, put together human who knows a lot of stuff about space.
To an extent. Yeah, I think for me, school, I loved learning, but I had a hard time sitting still. I had a hard time focusing. And then I think the way that I've conceptualized it at this point in my life is like, nobody ever showed me how to do homework. And so I remember getting home from school or from sports practice or whatever other extracurriculars, my job, and being like, I want to do this assignment, but I would sit down and be like, what do I do? I don't know what I do next.
Yeah.
Just not having any, do I think about it? I have to read this thing, but then I get really distracted and I'm thinking about this other thing. And it's not that it's not related to this, but I just didn't have any mechanisms or any guardrails around you do this and then you do that. The best thing that I learned how to do is, I think, when my dad told me, you don't need to understand something when you read it through the first time. Just read it through and then you read it through a second time and sometimes a third or a fourth time, and then you start to put the details together. And I still use that to this day. But the mechanics of learning and completing assignments was super elusive to me as a kid.
So do you feel like you were labeled as a bad student growing up, or did you get bad grades? And were people like, what? Obviously you're smart, so what's the deal? Or were you just kind of under the radar?
I think pretty under the radar because I was a pretty good kid. I was definitely spastic. I remember the feeling of when things get exciting, of just being like, oh, we feel like things are exciting now. And I would just I would go from being very introverted and quiet to just oh my God.
Yeah.
And when it would be like, oh, everybody was loud, but you got too loud. And now it's over. And I was like, I just don't understand. I didn't know how to regulate or participate. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But I guess I remember being put in remedial reading in 3rd grade and being like, why do I have to go to this other classroom? Like, I feel like that classroom's the A class and this is the B class. And like, I don't really know why.
Yeah.
And just being like really bored and just like, and then I think
Mhm.
in middle school, I remember I got a C for the first time. Maybe that was like the first time we had like an A through F grading process. I
Mhm.
don't know. And I just started hiding my transcript. And
Mhm.
my parents were just like, "How are you doing in school?" And I was like, "Fine." And like that was it. It was fine. I was like a BC student pretty consistently.
That's so interesting. But you did go to college.
Yeah, I did. I went to college. I went to a small liberal arts college. I left after my 2nd year. I took a semester off because I was like, I don't know what I'm studying. Why am I doing this? I
Mm.
had a job for a semester. And then I was like, okay, I'd rather study than do this. And I feel like I went back to school and I knew how to focus with a new vigor after that, after being made to sit at a desk like
Mhm.
8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I caught up with credits at Rutgers, so I did that over the summer, and so I graduated on time, but it was not a super linear path, I suppose.
It's so interesting, right? Being in school and having to sit still, and that was hard. And then maybe just you're flying under the radar because you're a good kid and you don't have any behavioral issues, but it was
Mm,
obviously more challenging. And you're really, really smart. Like a lot of the kids I work with are super, super smart, but things
mm,
are hard for them.
mm.
And then going into college and having this kind of non-linear path, you get into college and you've been sitting still your whole life. And I think it's a lot easier to concentrate and want to learn with something when you are interested in it, right? That's a
Yes.
lot easier.
Yeah.
And when you have something and you're not interested in it, like that remedial reading, you're like, this is
Oh,
totally,
yeah. I
totally
wanna die
dumb.
or just, like, go to sleep.
Yeah. Why are we here? Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like with ADHD, it's these extremes where you're really either
Mm,
very interested in it or you're like,
okay.
this is not something that I'm ever gonna do or learn, and I don't
Totally.
understand the meaning. A lot of
Absolutely.
it's like, I need to understand why I'm doing this for me
Yeah.
to do it.
Well, yeah, and that I find is true for anything. If I don't understand the why or some of the mechanisms behind the thing, I just lose interest super quickly. So I love doing research and I love peeling apart thick technical concepts. Like that's a lot of what I do at work. Right? I've sat as a software engineer and a technical person, but what I love to do is the communication because I get to do all of the research and then describe the layers of that to other people who are less technical and need conceptual understanding.
Yeah, and I do think that's an ADHD thing where you're like, have these ideas, right? You're able
Mm.
to have this really special kind of zone of genius where you're like, oh,
Huh.
I'm really good at this and it's really motivating and so I can do it. Whereas someone else would look at that and be like, I totally cannot do that. But if you don't have something on your calendar, you're like, well, that
It's
does not exist for me. So
totally.
later.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So, what I think is interesting is that not only do you have these ADHD tendencies, but also you're a fairy. And that seems like a huge mind blowing juxtaposition,
Mhm. Right.
according to my experience. So, can you
Yeah.
tell me about that?
Yeah, totally. I feel like I'm learning so much just from your podcast and listening to you. So I don't have a great understanding of this, but a lot of what you were talking about in terms of fairy activities really resonated with me. So, particularly in shared living spaces. So, my partner, I think, is probably undiagnosed ADD or ADHD. I just don't know enough to really say anything authoritatively, but he will do things like he just leaves tasks half done all over the place. And he just doesn't see when there's a mess or see things. Like he'll leave the drill on the middle of the kitchen counter and then start cooking dinner. And I'm like, oh my God, we have to move this or clean this. Or like the dishwasher thing. He just leaves the dishwasher open all the time. And I'm like, this is such a terrifying hazard. We need to stop doing this.
It's
Yeah.
that object permanence, right?
Yeah.
I can relate to that because I literally do not see things.
Yeah,
Like,
that was so interesting to me when you were describing that because I can relate to that in some regard, but I think that he would relate to it maybe in a very different way. But he and I have talked about that. Like it's so, so different and things just completely disappear from his purview.
mm,
I guess the fairy aspect is just like if I don't keep a calendar that also includes him, he will never be at the thing. Instead of him keeping his own calendar, he now has a view of my calendar. So I put things on there for him or that we both need to be aware of and reminding him of things with his daughter or, just lots of reminders like dates and times for him just are gobbledygook. They don't mean anything. And so I guess that's probably the biggest thing. I've also lived with people, one of my best friends from high school, who just leaves cabinets open everywhere he goes.
Yeah, that's me.
It's just so interesting to me how dynamic these experiences are, right? Because there are some things that you talk about in the ADD, ADHD where I'm like, oh my God, that's me. But then there's other aspects of the fairy life where I'm like, oh my God, that's also me. But I think that people must experience varying degrees of all of this stuff and also be prone to different aspects of it all, right? We're all such unique, weird creatures, but we have these threads of very shared experiences. It's just everybody's makeup of those threads is going to be unique to them.
Yeah, another interesting aspect of this too is as a woman, so a girl growing up,
Mhm.
and like we talked about, ADD or ADHD looks different in girls,
Okay.
right? And so you're able to mask and you've come up with these systems and dialed in a profession or career that is on you. And at the same time, I feel like culturally as women, we're also told that we need to A, keep it together,
Mm.
B, take care of other people in our space. We hold culturally a lot of the responsibility for others.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so not only is it masking, but on top of that, you're like, okay, I'm told and I've been told that I need to do all of these things to like quote unquote maintain a household,
Yeah.
right? Where you have a man who grows up and perhaps culturally he's older, right? He was
Yep.
not taught that
Yep.
or told that.
Yep.
So he comes in and he's like, maybe the woman, and this could be subconscious, right? Like,
Right.
the
Yes.
woman's going to take care of me, but you're like, I can take care of you, but it's probably 3 times more taxing.
Right.
And because you perhaps have the tendency to want to be like that, more of
Mhm.
yourself would be more ADHD. The fact that then you have to have the calendar and do these things, I think, like you alluded to just in a conversation, is more triggering, right? Because you're
Yeah.
like, can't you get your
Yeah.
shit together?
So hard for me to create these systems, and I have to adhere to them so tightly, or else like everything in my life falls apart. And so
Yeah.
when he's like, well, it's just really hard for me. I just can't keep times and dates. I'm like, then you keep a fucking calendar and that calendar is your life. And he's like, I just can't. I put things in my calendar and then I don't use it and I forget it. And I'm like, oh yeah, but it doesn't come for free. Right. And I think that's the thing that is so, so triggering to me. And like, that's not his fault. He's not bad or wrong. That's just his life path and what he's chosen to do. And he's like, it stresses me out to do this. So I'm just going to not, and that's going to be fine. And he talks about this in terms of like his work life. Like he's got a business partner, or not like official business partner, but somebody at work. He owns a business, and one of his employees who's been with him for a very long time really takes care of a lot of the front of house stuff and helps keep the business on the rail. So like I would think of that actually in this language or in this framework as like a fairy type of person. But I think you could also conceptualize it as, well, that's just somebody else's skill set. And it's really good that we have each other. But yeah, it makes me laugh now looking at it in terms of, well, I have maybe felt the need to create these systems, maybe just because I was alone a lot as a kid and like my life just fall apart and not happen otherwise. Or maybe it is some of these gender expectations, whatever it is, the mix of things that go into it. But it came zero for free, like getting to a place where I can manage all of that stuff. And so I almost feel like, and I've had to work on this, I feel like he's shirking a responsibility when he's like, well, that's just not for me. I just don't live that way.
Yeah.
Uh,
You can
and
imagine how parents feel too, right? With
right.
kids. The parents like, hey, here's the calendar. I set all this up for you. And you're like, I just can't really do that. And you're like, I think it feels very unseen, right?
Yeah,
And
it
you're like,
does.
I did so much work. Look at how much work I did. This is so hard for me. And he'd be like, well, I just don't really want to try.
Yeah, well, and this is one of the interesting things that I still am not sure that we've totally bridged, where I think he's like, well, if you didn't do that, I just wouldn't, and it would be fine. And that's how I live my life. And I'm like, no, this is work and it's valid work. And it's really good that I'm doing this because we're able to like do more and accomplish more things and not be late and not miss things. And he's like, well, I was fine living my life missing things. And so he doesn't really fully appreciate what I do, or like it means more to me than it does to him, I think. And that's also a very interesting dynamic to be like, okay, there is no right or wrong. Like I'm putting a value on what I think is right and what works for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it like he has to value it.
It's two extremes, right? Like two
Yeah.
completely different perspectives. And I feel like, again, if you take two people who have maybe a tendency for ADHD and you have them growing up, and one has created all these systems that they heavily rely on, and one's just like, well, someone will take care of that for me, or like, if I miss it, it doesn't matter. I care, but if I miss it, things will work out. So
Right.
one person's like, I heavily rely on these systems, and if I miss something, that's a huge deal, and maybe
Yeah.
I have my self-worth tied to that.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, he doesn't have his self-worth tied to missing things. He's like, well, sorry, that was hard for me, and I'll figure it out.
Yeah, and it's interesting now that you say it like that. I just reflecting on what I know about both of our childhoods, he was very prone to individual activities like, played guitar and lots of skateboarding and individually driven things.
On his own time, probably,
Yes, on
too.
its own. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then I'm very much like I want to be around people and I get very motivated by group things. So I was in a choir my whole childhood. I played lots of sports. I got a job as soon as I was like 13. I started working at the pizza shop in town and always had jobs and was always accountable to times and places where other people were. And so I think in order to participate in those things, I had to create systems. But yeah, chicken and egg kind of problem with those things, where that comes from.
No, totally. And I do think having ADHD and then being somebody else's fairy, and then I think a lot of us grew up with ADHD, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, as having our self-worth tied to that,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, things are harder for me. Maybe school was hard, or I didn't get good grades. Maybe I'm not as smart.
Yeah.
Make all of these things about you, right? Coming up and growing up in this really traditional world. Then as an adult, you're like, I made these systems to be successful, and you're literally not using the system that I spent my entire life creating.
Totally.
It's like, what the fuck?
What did I do all this work for?
Yeah, you're like, hello.
Yeah,
And he's
totally.
like, what?
He's like, I don't care.
It's really interesting too. And
Yeah.
I wonder if it does have something to do not only with just gender roles, but also how ADHD in boys presents very differently than ADHD in girls. In boys, it's more typical what you would think of as ADHD, which is like just more hyperactivity, running around in people's spaces, not able to attend. Where in girls, I think a lot of it comes from this, again, those gender roles of like, especially when we were growing up and beyond in previous generations, you're supposed to be good and you're supposed to sit still and you're supposed to listen and be polite. So you have all these expectations placed on girls. So they have internalized that, right? So if you want to be good and not in trouble and that's important to you, you can mask and really try to sit still, but something's got to give, right? At some point. And also just in general, the way ADHD presents in girls is different. They're not necessarily that hyperactive, wild child. So it's not as easily recognized. Right?
Yes.
Like when you have a kid who's disrupting the class,
Yeah.
that's very obvious. When you have a girl who's sitting there and not paying attention, but not saying anything and not disruptive, they will go totally unnoticed for the most part.
Yeah.
So you have these two things. And I think that in general, there's this historical saying of boys will be boys, right?
Right.
So in our generation and prior, they're given this leeway to be like that.
Yes.
Whereas girls historically were not.
Yeah. Totally.
It's this huge dichotomy. And you, especially then being more alone, it was like, well, you can figure it out. You should be able to do this. And you have all these responsibilities. And maybe when he was growing up, it was like, well, he's just kind of like that.
Right.
And so he has this attitude like, I'm just like this and that's fine. Where you're like, I'm like this, but I've done all of these things so that I'm not like that. Especially because he's, 10 years older? So in his 50s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a prior generation.
Yeah, totally.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
so wild.
I know, it's so wild. Is there anything else that you would like to share about this dichotomy between being a fairy and ADHD, or any recommendations, people?
That's a great question. I think that I'm still so early on my journey of understanding all of this in this framework. And the framework is really helpful for me. And I guess the biggest lesson and hurdle that I'm still every day learning about and trying to manage and create my own mental model around is just how completely differently we can experience the world. Right. And like even the value proposition on being organized is valuable. Right. And that's a construct, I think, actually. Right. And it's helpful in our capitalistic society. But, my partner also is able to be quite disorganized and very successful, run a business, but his support mechanisms just look different.
It
And
sounds like he has a lot of people.
yeah,
Maybe you have always relied on you.
right.
So he's developed this natural network where people fill in the holes because they can see it and they understand his zone of genius. And I
Yeah.
wonder for you if you're like, I have this zone of genius, or maybe I'm not even sure which one it is. And then because I've also always done everything myself and created the systems.
Yeah, I think this idea of zone of genius is so fascinating to me, especially because I am full time trying to run my own consultancy as of about 6 months ago. And I've like always wondered, what is it that greets me about a traditional workplace? And why do I gravitate more towards this consulting work? So I've done it on and off for years, and I've just really formalized it over the past 6 months. And yeah, I honestly think that like zone of genius, and I think that also like your description of kind of like deep dives into different topics
Mhm.
is really helpful in me understanding like, oh, this really speaks to how I operate and how I am best in terms of being productive. It's like I really love these very technical deep dives. I love tearing things apart, and I love going after jobs that are interesting to me. And
Mhm.
oftentimes at like more traditional workplaces, there are things that are part of administrative duties or just
Oh,
like
just like
kind
the
of the
worst.
political BS stuff, or just like you just have to do it because that's how we do it here type of work, where I'm like, this is inefficient. This is a waste of my time. We're not getting any actual work done. And this grates on my existence as a human being.
I think that's one of the really big benefits, though, of an ADHD brain is like you can look at something and be like, this is so inefficient. I might be inefficient,
Yeah.
but I can tell you that this system, I can tell you what's working, what's not working, and this is dumb, it's irrelevant, it's old. And just being in that, fill out a timesheet, you're like, oh my God, why? For the love of God, do I have to do this? But like
Yeah.
the actual work where you're
Yeah.
consulting and you have these ideas, like that is genius.
Yeah.
Nobody else could probably do that better than you. And you're
Yeah.
like, I'm not gonna sit here and fucking fill out a timesheet for you
Right. Right.
ever.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The way I described my partner and then myself in terms of the mechanisms that work for us, and you called out, well, his mechanisms are very socially reliant and yours are very individually reliant, which is very interesting to me because I would expect that to be the opposite gender wise. Women are very communal, we're like are very social. But I also think responsibility wise, like what you were saying earlier, is like we do try to manage a lot ourselves. Do you know, is there any sort of gender breakdown around how that manifests? I mean, you were talking about the masking thing, but I wonder if there's anything deeper or I don't know.
Gosh,
And
I don't know. I feel like a lot of it is cultural. And I do
right.
feel like women are generally more communal and we lean on each other, but not for the responsibility stuff, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
we have to take on all these extra responsibilities. You look at any, just as an example, any mom, like the list of infinite shit that they take on,
Yeah.
right? So they have all these responsibilities, just like any woman has all these responsibilities that they assume the role of. And perhaps it's because historically, maybe we weren't given the benefit of the doubt to use our brains. So it's still this subconscious, I'm going to try to prove myself. Maybe it's just
Mm,
culturally, that's what we have to do. However, I feel like at the same time, we're very social and we reach out for other connections,
yeah,
perhaps more than men.
yeah.
Whereas men are like, I'll let all these other people take care of the shit that I don't want to do or I'm not good at.
Hmm.
But also, my ability to reach out in terms of a friendship or a relationship is less. So,
Mm,
like, I feel like women reach out for the love and the friendship, and men reach out for, like, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. They defer tasks that they don't want to do.
that's so interesting. Yeah, because my partner also says like he doesn't really need a lot of social activity because he's like, well, I see all my friends at work every day.
Right.
I,
So he comes home, but he doesn't have those extra people for just the emotional support. Whereas women are like, oh, I'm having a hard day. Let me reach out to my friends.
right. Yeah, it's so interesting. It's so nuanced.
Yeah, it's so nuanced. It's almost like the emotional responsibility versus the chore responsibility. Like
Right.
totally separate,
Two totally different buckets.
totally different buckets.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's such an interesting conversation that we should continue.
Yeah. I just adore the podcast, and it can be really challenging for me to listen to at times because
Yeah.
it resonates so much. But it's really just been helpful for me to start to, again, create a framework and understand, yeah, I think some new language about how to talk about some of this stuff and just recognize what some of these patterns are. I do think I've had moments in my life where I'm just like, am I just stupid or just
Mhm.
different?
Yeah.
I'm not that unique. So other people must be experiencing similar things to this, but why does it just feel hard?
Yeah. Sometimes it does feel really hard. Yeah. I think you're doing great and I think you're amazing. So there's that for whatever
Thanks.
that's worth.
I gotcha.
All right. My kids are screaming upstairs. So
Do
perhaps
it.
there's
Yeah, yeah,
something I
do it,
should
do
do.
it.
Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Yeah.
I
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me, Nat.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.